Today, for Celebrate Horror 2021 and Sadie's birthday weekend, I would like to read for you an excerpt from my brand new novella to be published September 2021, The House of Little Bones. Luca Foxwaite sat in the park. He was chilled through, the wooden bench he'd been sitting on for nearly 40 minutes, anything but comfortable. He had his hands in his coat pockets, a beanie hat pulled down over his ears. His boots were covered in mud from the miles he had tramped. It was close to dusk. A single lamppost pulsed on and off at the edge of the path, as though trying to pierce the gloom was a task it wasn't relishing. He should be at home, head down over his books, but since the news leaked out, all thoughts of his master's degree had fallen by the wayside. Dark thoughts swirled in his mind. Why the hell had he even come out here anyway? A small laugh fell from his lips. Oh, that's right. It was supposed to be all about getting his head around the fact he'd been discarded like a piece of litter. And probably to fume silently about a father who had expressly forbidden him to see David Lansdowne ever again. But his father couldn't stop him thinking about David. His whole life seemed to be filled with men who treated his feelings as though they meant nothing. He felt tied up in knots, threads unravelling from his perfect upbringing, but there wasn't much perfect about being a puppet in a house full of strings. With a heavy sigh, he eased himself up from the bench, felt the blood rush into his feet and fingers. By now, David would be far away at his new home. He knew from overhearing his father on the phone to Imelda Davros that David would have no car and no internet. He'd be going cold turkey on everything but the most basic of communications. He'd be settling down to write about demons and ghosts and unexplained things crouching in the gloom. It was a source of dark amusement to Luca that David had never encountered anything remotely paranormal, unless Luca considered himself a part of that. No one had ever believed him as a child that the monsters were real, that sometimes he felt as if they lived within his shadow. As he walked towards the park gate, as blackness hovered like a skulking dog, Luca let his thoughts drift back to the night they first came to visit. He was 6 years old. The noise from his parents' party below echoed through the floor, the muted sounds of music, people laughing. It was New Year's Eve, and the weather decided to welcome in another year with an Arctic blast of cold and driving rain. Against his window it lashed, roaring its rage, forcing its cold tongue through the gaps in the Georgian sash windows. Luca couldn't sleep. He tiptoed to the door, stuffed lion in his hand. His sister Lissy had given it to him, told him it was so he could learn to be brave and fierce. He opened his bedroom door a little, needing the warm light of the hallway, but someone had turned it off, and only darkness waited. A whimper left his throat. He wasn't tall enough to reach the switch. And Lissy's room was at the end of the hallway. He clutched the lion to his chest and tried to summon up the courage to walk into the gloom. The stair creaked below, and the sound of heavy steps. If this was his father come to check on him, he'd be reprimanded for being out of bed. Lucas scooted back into his room. The gap between his mattress and the thick carpet looked different tonight. He imagined he could see a shape curled within it, something dead, half-rotted, something waiting for him. He launched himself into bed, where the duvet lay twisted from his restless attempts at sleep. His head hit his pillow as the steps sounded in the hallway. His leg slid under the duvet as he frantically tried to untangle it. Luca closed his eyes tight. And then he felt something cold and wet, like a dead fish, enclosing his ankle. A cry burst from his lips as he kicked away the duvet, expecting to see a monster. His bladder let go, and warm urine soaked his pajamas and sheets. "For God's sakes, Luca!" His father entered the room, his shadow reaching Luca first. "Get into the bathroom and clean yourself up." Luca slid out of bed, his wet pyjama bottoms clinging to his legs. As he shut the door to his bathroom, he climbed onto the plastic step and pulled on the cord to switch on the light. He could hear his father on the phone, knew he was ringing for their maid to come and change the sheets, someone else to avoid looking at in the next few days. As he fumbled with the tap to turn on the hot water, he tried not to look at his reflection in the mirror. Monsters lived there at night. Everyone knew that. He pulled off his wet clothes and stood there shivering as he washed himself down with a flannel. But his eyes widened when he reached his ankle, where he'd felt the cold and slimy touch of something he fervently hoped was a part of the duvet that had been towards the window in the winter chill, was a long pink blister. It didn't hurt until he looked at it. He pressed his fingers along the pocket of shiny skin. There was liquid underneath. The tip of his tongue protruded from his lips. He pressed a little harder. One edge gave under the pressure, and the liquid squirted out, hitting him on the cheek. This time he screamed, and this is where Charles Foxwaite found his son, naked and inconsolable, as the clock ticked over into a new year.